During the early to mid-90s, one-on-one fighting games were huge in the arcade. Games like Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, and Virtua Fighter were tearing up the scene. But what if dudes and ladies punching each other into submission just wasn't enough for you? What if you wanted a game with complex, calculated movement controls, 2 joysticks, and giant mechs? This is Virtual On. Released in the arcades in 1996, Cyber Troopers Virtual On, or Virtual On Cyber Troopers depending on who you ask, is a one-on-one mech combat game in an open 3D arena. Before I talk about the game in depth, I just want to mention the arcade cabinet, because look at it! The game is presented in a twin cabinet configuration, not unlike what you would see with Daytona USA, but just the look and feel of this cabinet is so cool! The artwork on the sides and on the back of the seat, the control panel, even the plexiglass barrier that prevents you from looking at your opponent's screen. Sega made no compromises in making this cabinet a looker. With it being a fast-paced competitive arcade game, it needed controls that could take some punishment, and Sega delivered with a pair of solid twin sticks for each side. I could talk about this cabinet for a while, but let's get into the game itself. As I mentioned before, Virtual On is a 3D arena combat game between 2 mechs called Virtuoids. There's a story that involves some desolate moon base being rebuilt by some company, and how all the other factions are building Virtuoids to combat this threat, but none of this is ever really talked about in the main arcade mode, so I'd just ignore it. These events, however, have given this game the official subtitle Operation Moongate, but for everyone else's sake, let's just call it Virtual On. When you start out, you have a choice between 8 different machines, each with varying degrees of difficulty and skill to operate efficiently. Stuff like speed, attack power, weapon versatility, and air mobility are all factors to take into account. But it's best to just play all of them to see which one best suits you. Besides, there isn't much to do beyond the arcade mode, so playing and learning all the different machines is where you'll find most of your playtime. Once you've chosen your Virtuoid, you're thrust into battle. Literally. As your fight begins, you'll start to wrangle with this game's control system. With the use of the twin sticks, it'll require some learning to get the hang of it, but the best way I can describe it to people is that it's kinda like a Katamari game, where both sticks have to work together to maneuver your machine. Once you figure that out, you're golden. Now it's down to learning basic attacks. Your right trigger is your default shot. Left trigger is a bomb-like ability that can sometimes be thrown over obstacles. Pressing both triggers at the same time will do a devastating special move. You can also do a melee attack when you're in close proximity to your opponent. Every attack is on a cooldown, which is displayed via green bars in the middle of the screen. Each Virtuoid has its own unique attack, so learning each machine and what they dish out is essential to victory. Probably the most important move in the game is dashing. Each stick has a dash button on top, but it doesn't really matter which one you press. When firing your weapons while dashing, you will automatically lock onto your opponent. This may seem like a weird design decision, but there's even more hidden depth within the dash mechanic. Depending on which direction you're moving in while dashing, your weapon will fire differently. It can vary in ways like a rapid machine gun shot or a 3-way spread gun style shot. Knowing when and where to dash is critical in getting the upper hand in battle, especially when navigating around obstacles. You can also jump in your machine by pulling both sticks away from each other, which allows for more variation in battle. Now you're probably wondering how they managed to translate these controls to the Saturn version. Well, they did a surprisingly good job with it. They give a bunch of different controller layout options, but I'd highly recommend Option E. Option E is the closest to replicating the arcade's twin-stick controls on a Saturn pad, with the D-pad acting as the left stick, and the X, Y, A, and B buttons as the right stick. It works great, and just makes much more sense to me than any of the other options. Here's a Saturnology pro tip for you. If you have a Saturn 3D control pad, Option E feels way better on there, as the right stick D-pad configuration is even more ergonomically sound. Plus, the triggers on the 3D controller feel way better than using the standard Saturn pad's crummy shoulder buttons. If none of these options sound appealing, you can always go for the ultimate Virtual On control experience, the Sega Saturn Twin-Stick Controller. This controller was only released in Japan officially, and, as one would expect, still costs quite a bit of money today. Unfortunately for this reviewer, I don't have the cash to pony up for one of these yet. Maybe someday, though. With it being a one-on-one fighting game, you gotta have multiplayer. Virtual On offers a split-screen option that allows you to have the screen split horizontally or vertically, which is nice of them. It's also said to have compatibility with the Saturn Tyson cable to allow 2 Saturns to link up for some head-to-head play. I haven't tried this for myself, but I'll save that for another time. There was even a special Netlink edition made that allowed players to battle online. Super cool stuff. The 3D arena fighter genre has remained popular in Japan for years, but never truly caught on here in the States, so a game like Virtual On still stands out as something truly unique. I should warn you, this game is not for everyone. The controls would take some time to get used to, and some may not find the combat that satisfying. But for those who stick with it and find its true depth, will find an incredibly satisfying experience. If you're a Saturn owner, this is not one to be passed up.